If you're someone like myself who suffers from the illness known as
Deltarune brain rot,
you're probably a little bit tired of discourse about the Roaring Night. We all know what the score is at this point. Alvin is boring, Chris is complicated, we know so little about Des, Gaster, the Mayor, and the Vessel that they're essentially non-starters. Rules card is a meme, Papyrus is here too for some reason, and if you know the name Oberon Smog and have an opinion on Oberon Smog, I'm sorry to say,
you're in too deep.
With all these options running through your brain, surely you must be thinking, if only some little freak would come along with yet another night theory to take up more of my headspace. Well, consider yourself lucky because that little freak has arrived. What if I told you that under my theory, none of these characters are the Knight, but at the same time, any of them could become the Knight? Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone else, I present the 7 Days and 7 Nights theory.
Part 1. The Proposal.
To begin, I'm just gonna come right out and say it. I propose that the Knight is not an individual, but a title. A title given to the person who opens any given Dark World. This idea first occurred to me when I learned that in feudal times, more often than not, knight service was directly tied to land ownership. Full disclosure, I'm not really a history buff, but according to the information that I could gather from my good friend John Wikipedia, it was typical for a knight to be paid for his service with something called a knight's fee. A unit of land deemed sufficient to support a knight provided by the lord he served under. There's a bit more nitty-gritty to get into, but essentially, if you were a knight, you had acres of land to call your own. Combine this with the fact that the word night is homophonous with night as in nighttime, and I don't think it's far-fetched to speculate that night is a play on words used to refer to the person who opens and therefore exerts some degree of power over a dark world. Now, I realize that this evidence isn't particularly compelling on its face, but when I read back over Deltarune keeping this interpretation in mind, not only did I find nothing that contradicted it, I found evidence that supports it and opened completely new avenues of theorizing I've never seen anyone touch before. So let's get into it. First of all, I figure you're probably thinking, no contradictions? Hey dumbass, how about the fact that every character in the game calls the Knight the Knight? Hey dumbass! Hey dumbass! And yeah, you've got a point. But consider this. When an American talks about the American president, they don't say the American president, they say the president. There's no need to specify which country's president they're talking about. It's obviously the country they belong to. Why can't the same be true of Darkners? When a Darkner says the Knight, isn't it possible that they're using it as shorthand for the Knight of this dark world? I don't think that's far-fetched at all, and if you think that's a stretch, then why don't we take a look at the times the game doesn't use this phrasing. 2 separate times, in fact. Which brings me to our boys, King and Sham. Yeah? Yeah? Okay, got it. I've just been informed that Sham is non-binary. My deepest apologies to Sham and the LGBTQ+ community. I will do better. Anyway, towards the end of King's fight dialogue, he says the phrase,
"My knight, I shall not fail you."
And when you talk about the Knight with Sham, they say,
"Historically, this land was ruled by the 4 kings from Card Castle to the east, but recently a strange knight appeared, and 3 of the kings were locked away."
Here we have King using the phrase "my knight" and Sham using "a knight." King's dialogue is self-explanatory here. My knight could very well imply that he's talking about the knight of his specific dark world. Meanwhile, Sham's dialogue is a little more interesting. First of all, the phrasing of "a strange knight" by itself, using knight as a regular-ass noun rather than a proper noun, indicates that there could be multiple knights. However, I think we can extrapolate even further. They're notably the only Darkner that appears visibly old and worn out.
Like that man right there.
And I think there's a reason for that. I think Sham's age could very well indicate that they're the only Darkner we've met who's been around long enough to have met another knight in the past, which would explain their lack of reverence for this new one. Therefore, when they're talking about the knight who opened the Card Kingdom, they say a strange knight, a knight that's comparatively strange to the knight they've met before. I have some speculation about who this other knight could have been, but it's not going to make sense until further into the video, so I beseech thee, dear viewer, please let me cook. Let's put a pin in Sham and come back to them later. For now, we have more evidence to get through, and this next bit is kinda game-changing, in my opinion. Our next 2 excerpts come from 2 different versions of Queen's monologue toward the end of Chapter 2, depending on the route you take. On the normal route, when discussing her plan to have Noelle create a dark fountain, she says, "If the night has taken its leave, then I will simply make a new one." And in the weird route, when Noelle isn't available, she says, "Chris, Susie, which one of you wants to be the new knight?" So Queen is saying the quiet part out loud here, right? I mean, she's literally blatantly saying that she wants Noelle, Chris, or Susie to become a knight for her. These pieces of dialogue don't mean much when you're of the mind that the knight is one person, but in the context of this theory, it's kind of the strongest possible evidence I could ask for, and it's right there in the climax of the chapter staring me in the face. On top of that, when you first meet Birdley, he says, "Fear not, my beloved Noelle. This valiant warrior of brave intelligence will be your knight in glow-in-the-dark armor." Look at that, the word is highlighted in yellow and everything. Not to mention, when Susie joins your party in Chapter 1, her stat screen literally gives her the title Dark Knight. There are hints all over this game that any Lightner can be considered a knight, and they go straight over our heads because we're so convinced that the knight is one guy. Next up, I want to discuss the new title and pronouns that Chapter 2 throws at us. Yeah, of course the knight has blue hair and pronouns. Firstly, the Darkners of Cyber City, namely Queen, Cap'n, and a couple Swatchlings, all refer to the knight with it/its the vast majority of the time, specifically 8 times, with the exception of Queen using they/them a single time. That of course begs the question, what were the knight's pronouns in Chapter 1? Surprisingly, after reading over all the knight-related text in the game, I can confirm that there are 0 pronouns used for the knight before Chapter 2. There is one more instance of they/them, but it comes from Susie, who says, "The Roaring Knight. Whatever they are, they're making these fountains." The reason this is notable is that Susie, unlike the Darkners in question, doesn't know shit about the knight. She's under the same assumption we're meant to be under. She's using they, a subject pronoun, because she assumes the knight is a known individual. Meanwhile, every other character leans toward it, an object pronoun, because they're talking about a knight who's one of many potential knights, which places much less emphasis on its individuality. You could also interpret the use of it as an implication that the Chapter 2 knight comes across as non-person-like in some way, or simply that the Chapter 2 knight uses they/it, but the bottom line here is that there are no pronouns that connect the Chapter 1 knight with the Chapter 2 knight. Now onto that title, the Roaring Knight. Isn't it strange that this name is nowhere to be seen until Chapter 2? I genuinely think the most reasonable explanation here is that Chapter 2's Roaring Knight and Chapter 1's Strange Knight are just different people with different titles. Now before you comment, I can hear you already.
What if Toby just wanted to wait to reveal the knight's full name until Chapter 2?
To which I would respond with, but moreover, I just don't understand why Toby would consider this information something to reveal. There's nothing dramatically interesting about learning the knight has a slightly cooler name than previously thought. It doesn't serve the narrative in any way. When I first read The Roaring Knight, I wasn't screeching and pointing at my computer screen. I was more like, okay, that's the knight's name now. It doesn't work as a reveal of the knight's connection to the Roaring because we don't know about the Roaring at this point. From where I'm standing, it just doesn't function as a reveal. Another argument I could see people making is that Toby just didn't come up with the name until Chapter 2, but I reject that idea as well. As a reminder, the climax of this game revealed itself to Toby in a fever dream. He sat on the idea for 7 years, he made another game to set this game up, he fully wrote and developed the first chapter of this game, and then you're telling me that after releasing it, he realized he wanted his antagonist to have, once again, a slightly cooler name? In the end, I'm not saying either of these arguments are impossible, but personally, I just don't buy them. Finally, before we move on to part 2, we have one last bit of noteworthy knight dialogue to look at, courtesy of Jevil. After being defeated with violence, he says, "The hand of the knight is drifting forward. Soon the queen returns and hell's roar bubbles from the depths." Whereas, after being defeated with mercy, he says, "From now, a nightmare will awaken in your hearts in the shadow of the knight's hand. Lightners, can you stop it?" I saved this bit for last because admittedly, when I first read it, I thought my theory was cooked. Both of Jevil's quotes here seem to indicate that the knight has a concrete course of action it intends on carrying out. The knight's hand is drifting forward. The things that happen from now on will be in the shadow of the knight's hand, especially the queen returns and hell's roar bubbles from the depths. He's implying that, at the very least, Chapter 2's events and the roaring coming to fruition will be the knight's doing. At face value, this definitely lends itself more to the idea that the knight is one individual pursuing a singular goal. We're going to put a pin in Jevil and come back to him later as well, because I do have an explanation, but once again, you gotta let me cook first. In the 4-course meal that is this video, you've only just finished your soup. The entree is on its way, and I promise it's gonna blow your mind. Or, blow your mouth, I guess. Look, the theory is gonna blow you. Wait.
Part 2, the predictions.
Whether you're intrigued by my theory, have me on in the background, or are gathering material for your cringe compilation, thank you for sticking it out long enough to get to part 2. Allow me to introduce you to my state-of-the-art, handy-dandy 7 days and 7 nights prediction chart, composed merely of 6 pieces of string and my completely normal and hinged thoughts. In this section, I'm going to try and make some evidence-based arguments for which characters will become the knight of each chapter, but more importantly, try and convince you why this version of the story would make thematic sense for the game. Now, to start with the obvious, I'm going to go ahead and slap the Chapter 3 knight on here, and yeah, it's Chris. Chris Knight Truthers, your cup runneth over. We already know how Chris learned to open Dark Worlds, and we see them do it on screen, so this really couldn't be more clear. Chris's motivations in doing this, much like Chris's motivations in doing literally anything, aren't super parsable at the moment. I personally lean toward Chris opening the fountain to have another fun adventure with Susie, or maybe involve Toriel in the mix, but I'm well aware that doesn't explain why they would still do it during the weird route. Though if we start speculating about the weird route, we'll be here all day, so let's not open Pandora's can of worms, or however the saying goes. For now, let's move our attention over to Chapter 1.
Part 2.1 The Strange Knight.
Before we reveal the identity of the Strange Knight, we need to talk about Gerson. Gerson Boom, Undertale's mysteriously knowledgeable shopkeeper and Deltarune's renowned historian, author, teacher, and memorial bench haver. There's a lot to say about Gerson, but for our purposes, what's most important is the quote on his memorial bench.
Throughout my career, some of my best ideas came from dreams. Take a rest here. If anyone asks, you're writing.
I feel like I just pulled out, a perfect impression of the old man from Smiling Friends.
This works better than the paper clips.
Gerson is the author of a fantasy book series entitled Lord of the Hammer, and here he speaks about how his best writing ideas came to him in dreams. Innocuous at first, but you have to remember that dreams have a certain relevance in Deltarune. Susie, Noelle, and Birdley all question if their experiences in the Dark Worlds were dreams. When you go back to bed at the start of a chapter, you're immediately taken to the Dark World. Hell, Toby Fox's first ever cryptic-ass tweet he made all the way back in 2011 reads,
"The edge of the shadow, where reality and dream meet."
Dark Worlds and dreams are inextricably connected in Deltarune on some level. This has led many folks, including myself, to read Gerson's quote as some pretty pointed foreshadowing that Gerson didn't get his ideas for fantasy novels from his dreams, he got them by visiting Dark Worlds. Not only that, but the abandoned classroom that houses the Card Kingdom is also heavily implied to be Gerson's classroom, back when he was a teacher, as evidenced by Bold and Brash over here hanging on the cabinet. Toby Fox confirmed this to be Alvin's drawing of Gerson on the Undertale 6th anniversary stream. So, all this to say, Gerson is the knight of Chapter 1, right?
Right? Wrong!
Nah, the dude's 6 feet under, if you forgot. That's why I believe the Chapter 1 knight is Alvin Boom. That's right, Elven Knight Truthers, your completely missable, talk sprite lacking slab of turtle meat has prevailed. Alvin, from his connection to Gerson, is the most likely character to have knowledge of Dark Worlds from the game's outset. I like to imagine Gerson told Alvin on his deathbed or left it in a dying note or something, but I acknowledge that's just my speculation at this point. Picture this though. We know Gerson only died a few years ago, meaning Alvin could very well still be in mourning. Of course, he's baffled by his father's parting claim that he could create entire worlds and fantastical characters out of mundane objects. But above all this, he longs to see his dear old dad again. So he makes his way to the school, somewhere he should have easy access to, because not only is he a trusted public figure in hometown, but he also has a room full of his late father's belongings to tend to. He locks himself into Gerson's old classroom, surrounded by his old things, and most importantly, a drawing of Gerson he made as a child. This drawing, an inanimate object representative of Gerson, is the only chance he has to see his father again, and so he strikes the earth. Not only does this theory cover Alvin's means and motivation, but it's where we bring Sham back into the picture. If you recall, we were speculating that Sham, due to their age, could have met another knight in the past, and considers Chapter 1's knight strange in comparison. So who was the first knight Sham met, and why does Sham think Alvin is so strange? Consider this. When you check the bookshelf in Toriel's classroom, the flavor text says, "Kids' books. Some of them used to be yours." I think this deliberately sets up the precedent that teachers in this school might use their children's old belongings in their classrooms. Sham, as previously discussed, is old as hell. So what if Sham was one of Alvin's childhood toys? This would explain why Sham has presumably met a knight before. If Gerson was making Dark Worlds for inspiration, it's only natural that items from his household would end up as part of them. And why does Alvin come across so strange to Sham? Simply put, bro is flabbergasted. He's seeing one of his beloved childhood toys walk and talk in front of him. He's in disbelief and probably somewhat emotional, so of course Sham would think he's a weirdo. The only counter I can see to this theory is that it doesn't explain his motivations in putting the Spade King into power and locking the other three away. To be fair though, we don't necessarily know this was the knight's intention. The dialogue goes,
But recently a strange knight appeared, and 3 of the kings were locked away. The remaining king put him and his strange son into power.
The weird thing about this dialogue is that it implies that these things happen as a result of the knight's appearance, but nowhere does it actually say the knight did these things itself. The words aren't, a knight appeared and locked 3 of the kings away. It reads, a strange knight appeared and 3 of the kings were locked away. You have to remember that every word of this game's dialogue was deliberately written, and there was no reason to phrase it in such a confusing way unless the confusion was deliberate. The reasoning behind this could be as simple as this. Alvin opens the cabinet, a few cards go flying out, and they land in an old animal cracker box. Then, the dialogue doesn't state that the knight put the Spade King into power, the Spade King put himself into power. And I think he assumed this was the knight's intention, just like Queen assumes the knight's intentions in Chapter 2. Now anyway, we've spent a long enough time making up a character arc for Deltarune's least interesting character, so let's move on to Chapter 2.
Part 2.2, The Roaring Night.
Now, let me be real for a sec. Before this theory emerged and took over my frontal lobe, I was a Chris Knight guy, through and through. I was of the opinion that most of the arguments against them were overblown and that it was clearly the intention, even if some minor details didn't add up. But even in my staunch belief, one piece of the puzzle didn't sit quite right with me. When exactly was Chapter 2's Dark World opened up? Queen specifically has that line that states the knight opened the Dark World today. And yeah, this could technically work if Chris made the fountain after midnight, but if that's the case, why word it this way? Why word it in a way that creates a discrepancy? Queen didn't have to specify that it happened today, but she did, and like we've already discussed, every word of this game's script is intentional. Furthermore, if Chris made it during the night, why has no one else discovered it? Presumably, someone has to open the library in the morning and be there to run it all day, and not a single soul, including the librarian, has entered the computer lab? I can suspend my disbelief for the supply closet and the abandoned classroom. It's not absolutely necessary for the school's faculty to enter these places every day, but the computer lab seems like an essential part of the library. I mean, it's half of the damn building. This has pushed a lot of folks into the conclusion that the knight was hiding in the closet and opened the fountain after Noelle and Birdley entered the room, but my problem with this interpretation is that we've seen for ourselves that Dark Worlds take a long-ass time to open up. No way Noelle and Birdley wait around while the room fills up with black smoke. I've heard speculation that they could have been asleep when it happened, but these are star students we're talking about. I strongly doubt that Birdley and Noelle are ones to fall asleep during a study session. Besides, the game has no issue spelling out that Chris is our resident narcoleptic. You'd think that if Birdley or Noelle were prone to dozing off, or even just a little more tired than usual that day, there would be a single line of dialogue to tip us off. All of this being said, I think it's much more likely that Birdley and Noelle fell into the Dark World in the same fashion Chris and Susie did. So who's a knight candidate who could reasonably have knowledge of Dark Worlds, the appropriate time frame to open this fountain, and the power to make sure no one else, including the librarian, stumbles into it all day? Miss Boom. That's right, Miss Boom Truthers, it's finally your time in the limelight. Reveal yourselves! Damn, not even crickets. Now, the less obsessed among you might not even know who Miss Boom is, and that's totally fair because she's mentioned in literally one line of dialogue in the entire game. When the gang is coming to after the events of Chapter 2, Birdley says, I'm gonna be late for my shift with Miss Boom! It seems Birdley has a job with Miss Boom, and we see him working behind the library desk in Chapter 1, meaning that she's the most likely person to run the library. Judging by her last name, she obviously has relation to the Boom family, maybe Alvin's mom and Gerson's widow, or Gerson's daughter and Alvin's sister, who knows. Point is, she's a Boom. Having a connection to Alvin gives her a plausible reason for knowing about Dark Worlds, her running the library gives her the means to open the Dark World that same day, and she would have the power to keep people from using the computer lab all day. On top of that, when you talk to Spamton about the night, he says,
Speaking of
communion.
Chris, did you know that the night... No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to...
If you're not familiar, communion is a church tradition where bread and wine are passed around and eaten as symbols of Jesus' body and blood. Sometimes in churches where children are encouraged to participate, the wine is replaced with grape juice. There's actually a reference to this in Deltarune. Alvin makes a comment about how Chris doesn't participate in church activities and just wants to drink the sick fruit juice. Unfortunately, Spamton gets cut off, so we don't know exactly what he was going to say, but the fact that he draws a connection between the night and communion, I think is pretty straightforward proof that the Chapter 2 night has some connection to the church. Miss Boom, as the priest's wife/mom/sister, fits that bill. It's harder to speculate on her motivation with the info we have about her, but I think it's reasonable to assume her motivations are similar to Alvin. She wanted to open a dark world around something that represented Gerson. What is that something, you ask? Well, consider Queen. One of the most perplexing elements of how Darkners work is their backstories. Despite coming to life the same day you meet them, they have memories dating far, far back. Our standout example being Spamton's history stretching back to 1997. I think it's reasonable to assume that Darkners have memories that reach back for as long as the objects that they're based on have existed. Of course, though, this begs the question, why do King and Queen have a history with each other? Presumably, the laptop that is Queen and the playing card that is King have occupied a room together in the past. So what if the laptop belonged to Gerson? If Gerson tended to use it in his classroom, it would explain why King and Queen are familiar with each other, and it would also explain why it's in the library now, since it could now be in Miss Boom's possession. Miss Boom decides to open a dark world, and to reconnect with Gerson, she boots up the laptop that's packed full of his data, his writing, and his pictures. She stabs the ground, eager to see her departed family again, and to her horror, she gets Queen instead.
That's rough, buddy.
So that's chapters 1, 2, and 3 down, and with that, I want to pull this guy out of gay baby jail. If you recall, I was questioning what Jevils' night-related dialogue was all about. With the information we've gathered, we have to assume he was talking about Alvin, because he's our chapter 1 knight. Alvin's hand is drifting forward, apparently, and as a result, chapter 2 is going to happen, and eventually the roaring. The events of this game are playing out in the shadow of his hand. Is Jevil implying that Alvin has a master plan to cause the roaring? Well, no, I don't think so. I think if anyone had a master plan to cause the roaring would be happening. Stabbing a weapon into the ground takes like 2 seconds, and the fountain gives you plenty of time to get out of there and make more. There is no reason for the knight to be opening one dark world a day if it wants to blanket the world in darkness. It could go on a fountain-making spree down Main Street and be home for dinner. So what is Jevil talking about? He's talking about the events of the game unfolding not according to Alvin's plan, but because of Alvin's actions. Think about this. Alvin opens the Chapter 1 Dark World. As a result of his experience doing that, he passes the knowledge on to Miss Boom. The knight's hand moves forward. As a result of Miss Boom's Dark World, Chris learns how to open fountains. After this, Chapter 3's Dark World leads to Chapter 4's Dark World, and so on. The events leading up to the finale of this game continue to play out in the shadow of Alvin's hand, regardless of if he's even aware or not. And here's the kicker. Here's why I think this theory lends itself so well to the story this game is telling. What motivation do all of these knights have in common? The simple answer is escapism. It's not a new idea for me to propose that one of Deltarune's major themes is escapism. This game is about an assortment of sad, gay teens traveling to fantasy worlds to escape their sad, gay lives. Dark worlds allow them to feel powerful, heroic, and most importantly, in control. Everyone we bring to a dark world starts talking about how much better they are than real life. However, it's not just a story's protagonists that need a relationship to its main themes, the antagonist needs that connection as well. These connections complement each other, and from them, meaningful conflict arises. So what kind of connection does the knight have to escapism? If the knight is a guy who's just trying to cause the apocalypse for some reason, not much in my opinion. But when you look at why these knights are opening dark worlds, you have two people trying to escape their grief. You have a teenager from a broken home desperate for connection. The protagonists and antagonists of this game alike are turning to escapism to run away from their problems, and nowhere is that going to be more clear than in Chapter 7. Of course, before we get to Chapter 7, we have 4, 5, and 6 to get through. There's really no evidence to work off of, but I want this chart to get filled in, so let's think about what characters would benefit the most from escapism. In other words, who are the saddest sacks in Hometown? I'm going with Susie, Asgore, and Burger Pants. Yes, I do have ideas of how these could play out, and no, you may not hear them. In all seriousness, I think my Chapter 4 to 6 predictions would fit better into a more purely speculation-based video, so if you made it this far and you want to hear my insane Burger Pants conspiracy, maybe now would be a good time to subscribe. Anyway, at long last, let's... Oh, fuck, I keep on losing my damn place, dude. At long last, let's move on to Chapter 7.
Part 3, the Chapter 7 Tangent.
It's Noel. It is absolutely Noel. The evidence is staggering. It is 100% Noel. If there's any one point in this theory I am absolutely sure of, it's that Noel is this game's final boss, at least as far as the normal route is concerned. So let's get into it. First of all, Noel is telegraphed to be wildly important in this game, and I'm not just talking about her presence in the weird route. She's also the only character outside of the main trio to join our party. She's seen among Chris, Susie, and Ralsei in some of the earliest concept art of the Fun Gang. She received a crazy amount of focus during the Spamton sweepstakes, and she is one of 3 characters that when you name yourself after her in the intro sequence, the voice responds with,
"You are about to meet someone very, very wonderful."
The only other characters to receive this honor are Chris and Susie. You think that the game's third main character and party member Ralsei would be allotted a mention here, but you'd be wrong. Chris, Susie, and Noelle are the only ones important enough to get a compliment from Daddy Gaster. Now consider the escapism angle I've been talking about. Noelle has perhaps the saddest life out of any single character in this game. Her dad is dying, her sister is missing, her mom is neglectful, and worst of all, her best friend is Birdly. Also, let's be real, Rudy isn't making it out of this game alive. Noelle's life is set up to crumble around her by the story's end. Not only that, but she might be our single biggest proponent of choosing Dark Worlds over real life. After the Giga Queen battle, Queen says to Noelle in a line that totally isn't foreshadowing,
Noelle, disregard me, and with your own power, choose the world that makes you happy.
And later, Noelle is the first one to propose, I don't want to live in a world ruled by her, but if that wasn't the case, I wonder if this world wouldn't be so bad. Noelle marvels at the city, the fireworks, the night sky. She wishes Des were here to see this place with her, and of course laments that everything here can be healed with a little spell. Chapter 7 will see Noelle at her breaking point. With her father gone, she decides her real life is no longer worth living and decides to retreat to a dark world of her own creation where she can pretend everything is okay. The dark world she creates, the final dark world that will throw the earth into chaos and begin the roaring, is the Angel's Heaven. That's right, you didn't think I forgot about the prophecy, did you? The most confounding thing about the prophecy to me has always been the Angel's Heaven. We have a vague understanding of the roaring at this point. Presumably too many dark fountains are opened up, the sky runs black with terror, the land cracks with fear, the titans go titan mode, etc. Then, following this, the three heroes appear at World's Edge and banish the Angel's Heaven. What relationship does the Angel's Heaven have to the roaring? In fact, when did Hometown's religion come into this at all? Most perplexingly, how do you banish a place? How do you banish a heaven? Well, first of all, I'm sure I don't need to tell you about all of Noelle's symbolic connections to the angel, but have a list anyway. Both Spamton and this Addison directly call her Angel. On the Ferris wheel, she talks about growing a pair of angel wings. In the Dark World, she wears a white robe like an angel, and that angel statue in Rudy's hospital room was made by Noelle and Des. If you want to go even further and count her connections to Christianity in general, the thorn ring she wears in the Weird Route mirrors Jesus' crown of thorns, Queen hangs her up in a crucifixion pose, and oh yeah, Christmas is like her whole thing. It's not a new idea to propose that Noelle is or has a very profound association with the angel. So going by this interpretation, what is the Angel's Heaven? Well, take a look at how it's illustrated in the prophecy. The heroes are depicted standing around this pillar that seems to be erupting from the ground into the sky. Where else in Deltarune have we seen this? I don't know about you guys, but personally, if it looks like a fountain and quacks like a fountain, I'm gonna call it a fountain. And when we seal a dark fountain, I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're banishing that dark world. All of this to say, I think when the prophecy speaks of the Angel's Heaven, it's talking about the dark world Noelle creates in Chapter 7. Noelle, the angel, needs a world she can escape to when her life falls apart. A place where she can fully indulge in escapism, pretend that nothing is wrong, and refuse to face her problems forever. Her own personal heaven. The Angel's Heaven. This is Deltarune's ultimate examination of escapism, the extent to which it can both heal and harm you. In this game's final moments, we're going to be facing the consequences of it going completely unchecked, trying to pull Noelle out of her perceived heaven and convincing her that life is worth living. At this point, I suspect you're thinking something like,
Well, that's a nice story and all, but it leaves so much unaddressed. Escapism isn't Deltarune's only major theme, and this ending doesn't answer anything about Chris and the player, or Snowgrave or Gaster.
And you're right.
I totally agree with you, but to get into my thoughts about this stuff, we're admittedly going to have to take a detour away from this video's main focus on the knights. I hope that if you've listened to me spew my terrible takes for this long, you don't mind. Essentially, I think the game's main story is going to fulfill the prophecy and wrap things up for the casual fans with a nice little bow. Meanwhile, I think the Weird Route is where we're really going to dive into these meta elements and examine Deltarune's take on fatalism, aka your choices don't matter. Because whereas the normal route will have us fulfilling the prophecy, I think the Weird Route represents our best attempt to subvert it. Keep in mind, the prophecy's fulfillment depends on Noelle breaking down and creating the Angel's Heaven. In the Weird Route, we're making Noelle stronger. Not only stronger with her magic, but we can see in the scene where she and Rudy play Dragon Blazers that her personality is becoming more headstrong as well. In the normal route, the exchange goes, Silver Drake? I've never beaten this boss before.
Alright, hand it over, honey. I got this.
No, Dad, this is my battle. So, how about just telling me what to do?
Whereas in the Weird Route, it goes like this.
Silver Drake, huh? That's a new one. Alright, what's the plan, honey?
Maybe we could try Ice Shock?
Ice on the Ice Palace, boss? Don't you want to try Fire Shock or something?
Huh? Yeah, you're right.
Here, how about letting me control for a bit?
No, I'll control it myself.
Not like you to be a controller hog, honey.
We've only been on the weird route for one chapter, and already we're seeing results. If we continue making Noelle stronger, chapter by chapter, I think there's a good chance that when shit hits the fan, she's going to be emotionally hardened enough that she doesn't feel the need to create the Angel's Heaven. I imagine Chapter 7 playing out completely differently at this point, maybe seeing Gaster intervene when the prophecy doesn't go as planned, and this sequence of events finally providing answers about Des and the player's connection to Chris. To be clear, I'm not arguing that our manipulation of Noelle is a good thing. I think we'll be grappling with whether the psychological abuse Noelle had to suffer in our search for closure was justified, whether the ends justify the means or not, which could turn out especially devastating if it turns out we can't change the ending after all. That Noelle suffered for no reason other than to entertain our sickening hubris, our twisted desire to subvert her happy ending, all in the pursuit of finding Gaster, seeking answers to a mystery in a video game that came out a decade ago. Noelle should understand, right? After all, she's no stranger to finding secrets in old video games.
What was I talking about again?
I hope the Snowgrave detour there didn't distract too much from the point at hand here. I think the possibility that Noelle opens the game's final Dark World is kind of huge, and something we should be thinking about even if my larger theory doesn't turn out to be true. However, to round things out, let's take one last look at our roster of knights, and bring this video to a close. Alvin Boom, I dub thee Chapter 1's Strange Knight. Miss Boom, I dub thee Chapter 2's Roaring Knight. Chris Dreamer, I dub thee Chapter 3's Silent Knight. Susie Susington, I dub thee Chapter 4's Dark Knight. Asgore Dreamer, I dub thee Chapter 5's Horned Knight. Burger Pants, I dub thee Chapter 6's Pizza Knight. And of course, Noelle Holiday, I dub thee Chapter 7's Oh Holy Night. A huge thank you to those who have stuck it out this long. I'll be honest, I think I presented some fairly compelling evidence here, but what really pushed this theory over the edge for me was when I realized the thematic throughline it basically came pre-packaged with. To be clear, I know the exaggerated version of myself in this video tends to be a bit overconfident, but I'm fully aware this theory is a big swing. I just think it's more fun to take a big swing and miss than play it safe and get it right. Oh my god. If you have anything to say for or against the theory, I'd be happy to discuss in the comments. In any case, I hope I made you think, made you laugh, or at the very least fed your Deltarune brain rot for half an hour, cause let's be real, that's all we're really trying to do in this fandom. The wait for chapters 3 and 4 eats away at my psyche every day.
I'm going insane. You just witnessed the proof.
And please hit me with a subscribe if you enjoyed. I've already got a lot more coming down the pipeline. Look forward to finding Ralsei's absentee father, the actual evidence connecting Gaster and Des, and of course, the Burger Pants conspiracy. Yes, all real ideas that I really hope to make if this one does well. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and now I've written in the script that I'm going to improvise a sign-off that I'm going to repeat in every video moving forward. This has been Cameron, Cammy Boy G. I don't even know what the channel's name is yet. Fuck. Bye. Bye. Stay ruined, Delta heads. Kill me. Pee pee poo poo. Go watch Andrew Cunningham instead. Hold it, video's not over yet. While I was editing this video, fellow Deltarune enjoyer, the Soph trademark, uploaded a theory that is extremely similar to mine. She even used my goddamn clickbait. I just wanted to clarify that my script was finished before her video came out, so there's no idea pilfering there. I mean, you can check my Twitter. I've been posting about this stupid video for months. But anyway, check that video out too if you haven't. It's very good and comes to some different conclusions than I do. Love ya.